If anyone is asked their idea of a typical flying saucer, this is the shape that will almost certainly come to mind. A disc-shaped craft with a port-hold superstructure, a dome above it and 3 globes underneath. It was in a desert landscape very much like this that George Adamski claimed a craft of this type landed, and that he met one of its occupants. However, at a UFO conference in Wales a few years ago, Jenny Randall said that no such craft has ever been seen. We hope to show that this is not the case. They have been seen from many countries over quite a long time span. They've been seen even before Adamski made his contact. This craft was photographed over Passaic, USA, by Mr. J. Stock on July the 29th, 1952, 4 months before Adamski's first contact. It appeared in the book The Coming of the Spaceships by Gavin Gibbons. This is one of the now famous photographs of Scoutship, taken by Adamski in December 1952.
The stop and the B-29 came through on its routine flight. Next thing we saw was this big mothership aircraft that has now been named Mothership, and we thought our eyes were deceiving us. And so we looked through binoculars and we saw this ship having no wings or appendages of any kind, but it had a red sort of a symbol on the back of it, on the top, an orange looking. So immediately thought, well, this must be one of those ships. So I said to the group, I says, now some of you stay and watch this, while some of us will go down. There was 7 of us, altogether including me. We'll go down and help me set up the telescope. I was right near the wash, where I might photograph this ship, and that was the idea. At the time, putting the instruments together and placing the camera on it, and I had 8 plates fully filled with film ready to go. We were so busy watching and putting up the instrument that we didn't watch what was happening in the sky. During that time, the mothership released one of these so-called flying saucers. And it came in, just like we come into this room. Here we are, and these mountains going circling all around, just like that. And I shot all 8 shots at her. Didn't take too much time to focus. You didn't have the time. You were excited. You didn't know how long it's going to be there for you to photograph. You didn't know anything. So you done the best you could. I figured that most of those shots probably were no good at all, because the way I had to work. The group again stood a little ways from me, not too far. It says a mile. That's not true. Less than a half a mile, some of them, some even closer than that. Because Miss Wells sketched the man perfectly. All right? And she couldn't see that much, unless she was close enough to sketch him, as an artist must be. But I had them there standing, because the highway is heavily trafficked sometimes, not always, but most of the time, and there were cars moving pretty heavy on it that day. And I figured, well, we'll all start gapping in the sky and set up a telescope right nearby. All these cars will be stopping, and the next thing, we won't have a chance to even photograph it. It might just vanish out of sight just that quick. So I took the precautions to handle it that way. But after I shot the 8 of them, she went over the hill, and that's the last I saw. I thought that was the end. When I looked up into the sky, the big mothership was so small out there, must have been awfully high up there. She went out and out of space as far from the earth she could, and yet be seen a little bit. I didn't see the saucer really go up to it or nothing. I just saw it go over the hill and disappear. So I thought to myself, well, I wonder where it got to. So I told the group to help me dismantle the instrument, when the man finally waved to me. And immediately I realized this was something different. But I looked around and saw no ship. And I also knew that while the ship was in flight, and I was photographing it, that there was no one stepped out of it. So I was wondering where he came from. Wind was blowing pretty good out in the desert, and must have moved that ship that was hiding, because a flash of light shot out into space, and I spotted it. So immediately I started looking where it came from. And then when I found where that ship was hovering in a cove, horseshoe-type cove, the hillside was like this, and the ship was anchored against it, while down here was suspended at the other end in a neighborhood of about, we say, 12 to 13 feet from the ground, against the hillside. So I then asked him, is that your ship? And he nodded his head, it was. So we walked over from here 75 to 100 feet. walked over from the spot we were standing where we first met, over to the ship. He didn't warn me not to get too close to it. Well, when you get to talking and all excited and don't know what word to bring forth or what thought, because millions of them passing through your mind in a time like that, you forget yourself. And I kept moving around just like you tread water, and before I knew I was partially under the flange of the ship. And that's when my arm got caught, pulled up, and slammed back and paralyzed. Well, he grabbed for me then. Actually grabbed for me because had he not done so, I would have fallen fully under that ship, and my whole body would have got that condition instead of the arm alone.
At 11 a.m. on the 15th of February 1954, on the slopes of Coniston Old Man in the Lake District, 13-year-old Stephen Derbyshire, son of a doctor, while out walking with his 8-year-old cousin Adrian, photographed a flying saucer. The following statement was written by Stephen half an hour after the incident. Adrian and I were walking on the fell, looking for some birds and some good scenes to photographs, when suddenly Adrian slapped me on the back and told me to look at a queer spherical object which was gliding down slowly from a gap in the clouds. The object was shining a silvery white as the sunshine caught it. I quickly pulled out my camera and I took one photo, turned the film and took another photograph. Just as I'd finished, the flying saucer, which I now thought it must be, shot off up into the clouds at an alarming rate and disappeared. As it flew off, it went out of the sun's rays, and I could see it was made of a plastic-like metal which light could travel through, but I could not see through it. It had 3 landing wheels or domes, and a cabin as in the diagram with portholes on. The bottom came nearly to a point. Adrian and I were down in a small hill valley, so the rising in foreground of photo is due to the position we were in. Some grass is shown under the saucer. It also made no sound whatever, except for a swish as it went away. Leonard Cramp, in his book Space, Gravity and the Flying Saucer, showed by orthographic projection that the craft Stephen Derbyshire saw was of exactly the same proportions as the one Adamski photographed. The second photograph by Stephen Derbyshire shows an unusual distortion of the shape of the craft. The importance of this will become apparent. This photograph is also claimed to be one of a Venusian scoutship. It was taken by contactee Howard Menger, who claimed extraterrestrial contact many years before Adamski, but unfortunately didn't publicise it until afterwards.
I could see a hurricane down in the Gulf area from the craft. I took photos, but none of that. I took photos of the Earth, leaving the Earth. I took photos of approaching the moon. This is in 1956. Can you imagine how I felt? And this is before any of the astronauts went anywhere to speak of anything. They had, I think the Russians got the other side of the moon photographed, and incidentally, the slides that I have, the overlays, fit right on top of that long before we ever got there, which in itself is evidence that I'd been there. But I'm not trying to prove that I've been to the moon. I don't care too much about that. How these aliens did this, I don't know. But I was in their control, and they helped me do all this. We took a picture of approaching the moon. We landed in the section where it was dark and light sort of area. And we did see things that they claim are not there now. So I can't prove anything. We saw dome-shaped buildings. We saw people working there, Chinese, Russians, Americans, and other countries all working together in a common interest in these dome-shaped buildings. It was just amazing. So I don't know what to say there. So I've decided to get away from all of that and build a craft that people can see, they can touch it, and in a 40-foot model they can get in it and they can go.
Staffordshire's had a whole crop of flying saucers. Spots in the sky, lights in the sky, strange things. But the strangest of all was seen one day over this cottage. Mr. and Mrs. Rustenberg were living there, quietly, out in the country. And, well, you just tell me what you saw.
Well, it was one ordinary day. I was waiting for my husband to come home from work, and my 2 sons went to Seifert to school, and I was getting changed, and I heard this terrific noise. It was just like a giant chorus cauldron of water being poured onto a fire, a shh sort of noise, you know. And my first reaction was, oh, the children. I thought maybe a plane was crashing or something like that. And I slipped my jumper on and went outside to find my two sons lying flat on the ground in the garden in front of the house, shouting, "Mummy, Mummy, there's a flying saucer." Well, naturally, I just said, "Come on, don't be stupid. Come in the house." But felt sort of a strange sensation. Wended my way up the side of the house to where we had a pump, where we used to get all our water from, and automatically looked up to see this, all I can describe, this huge Mexican hat. It was stationary, this thing, and it was bright silver in colour, and it had a dome. A dome. It was tilted to sort of, I could see the occupants in it.
You saw people in it?
I saw people in it. There were two people in there. These people were beautiful people. That's the only way I can describe them. They had long golden hair, like a page boy bob, just like the old kings. You used to see photographs of the old kings. And the colour of the hair was golden. Now, I was really...
What were they dressed in?
They had a sort of a polo neck jumper affair, like a ski top suit, in pale blue. Now, these people weren't sat behind, one behind the other. They were sat together, but this, whatever it was tilted so that I could see them and they could see me.
Were you looking at them through windows, through portholes? Or
No, not portholes. It was just sort of like a cockpit, I suppose, that had this perspex or glass or whatever it was. They could see me anyway, and I could see them. And they had beautiful faces. I shall never forget their faces as long as I live. Their foreheads seemed to be a bit larger than, you know, the bottom of their faces as normal people you would expect to see. But maybe this was just whatever they had round their heads, which was like a transparent fishbowl. And they just looked. And I was absolutely paralytic with fear. I couldn't move, although my mind was ticking over. And they looked so sympathetic that I was just mesmerized for what seemed to be, ages, but it could have only been seconds. And I turned to sort of look down at the boys, was unaware that they were with me because I was so absorbed. And the next thing, I looked up and it was gone.
How low had it been?
It had been at the height I couldn't tell you. But the house that you've seen, it was just on top of the roof. It was hovering on top of the roof.
How big was it compared with the size of the house?
It swallowed the whole circumference of the roof. I couldn't see, the roof was completely blotted out. The chimneys I couldn't see. All I could see was this massive object that I described as like a Mexican hat without the bubbles.
And then it flew away sideways or upwards?
No, I didn't see. I just looked up and it had gone. But I assume it went straight up, because for a short while after in the sky I looked around and I said to my two boys, "Well, can you see anything? Can you see anything?" And they said, "There it is, Mum," and they pointed up, and I watched it. It was just like a little cotton meal in the sky, and it circled us 3 times. It went round 3 times, and then it just shut off, and that was it. When I started to analyse myself afterwards, I feared that I might have had an hallucination, but then I knew I hadn't had, because my sons were so sure about what they'd seen and what I'd seen. And it went through my mind that it was a secret weapon from Russia, and then I thought, well, it can't be that, because if they had something like that, they wouldn't need to fear anybody or anything.
Were you scared by it? Did you run indoors?
Oh, I was petrified. I couldn't move. I couldn't move a muscle. I was paralyzed with fear. But now I wouldn't be. Because now, when I look back, you know, I think, what an amazing thing to have happened, and for me to have seen it.
And when your husband came home, where were you?
Well, when my husband came home from the office, I was locked in the house with my children, under a big kitchen table that we were using.
Under the table?
Under the table, yes. It's funny now when I look back. You know, it sounds absolutely ridiculous, but this is the truth. This happened. And that's it. We were ridiculed. It was very embarrassing at the time, and people, they possibly thought, oh, she's a nutter. But, you know, who cares? This is something that's happened to me, and I'm a practically minded person, and that's it.
A typewriter mechanic from Brighton, Mr. B.V. Simmons, saw a sharply defined craft from the Pycombe-Henfield Road at about 10:15 a.m. on July the 5th, 1954. It was greenish, although the body was ringed with red, green and grey. The rings were very bright, and he watched it for at least 3 minutes as it moved across the sky southwestwards over Chanctonbury Ring. Luckily, he had his camera with him and was able to take this picture. Mr. Shaw, a sub-postmaster from Betley near Crewe, saw this craft, which he said came down from a perfectly clear sky, hovered over him on its side at a height of about 200 feet, then moved off at great speed northwards until it was lost to sight. He said, "My impressions were suddenness of appearance, silence, beauty of appearance and construction, and the weird effect of seeing a mass of this size hanging perfectly motionless in an empty sky. It had a peculiar mental effect, maybe caused by its sudden appearance. The time was approximately 7:30 p.m, and 2 others elsewhere in the village confirmed the sighting." Betley was the site of a further appearance of a craft 3 months later. This time it was seen by a schoolboy delivering papers at 7:30 on the morning of November the 22nd, 1955. The early morning mist hid the sun, and hearing a curious buzzing sound, the boy Reginald Kent looked round and saw this craft, with a green light shining on the top, hovering. By strange chance he had seen the other one and recognised that this was of the same type, except that this one had a bright light on top. Unlike the first one, it made a buzzing noise. It was not very high, and Reginald surmised that it may have landed. It hung motionless before moving slowly away northwards like the other one. He saw it last when it disappeared behind a tree. This craft was filmed by George Adamski at Silver Spring, Maryland on February the 26th, 1965, a few months before his death. He was with Mrs. Madeline Rodifer at her home there, and when developed the film showed the same distortion which appeared in Stephen Derbyshire's second picture, apparently caused by the craft's force field. This photograph was allegedly taken on the 21st of March 1968 at Kanab in Utah by Fritz Van Nest. And this one was photographed and drawn by architect Hugo Vega, 31 miles from Lima, Peru, on the 19th of October 1973. Leonard Cramp drew this beautiful sectional view of an Adamski Scoutship for his book Space, Gravity and the Flying Saucer, in which he goes into possible propulsion methods for the craft. He was one of several intelligent people who in the 1950s was convinced of the existence of the Scoutships and the truth of George Adamski's claims. These included Waveney Girvan, editor of Flying Saucer Review, Gavin Gibbons, author of 2 books on the subject, and Desmond Leslie, who co-authored Flying Saucers Have Landed. Now, however, it's the fashion in ufology to brush all this under the carpet and say none of it ever happened, nor was a scoutship ever seen. It is true that many UFOs seen nowadays are not only not of this type, but the occupants seem radically different too, although as we have seen a scoutship was photographed as early as 1973. This of course does not affect the earlier evidence in any way, particularly the orthographic projections, which Jenny Randall had no answer for at the conference in Wales and quickly changed the subject. Even the effects on witnesses have seemed to change. Earlier it was described as something akin to awe. Nowadays it's more usually described as terror. This change is one of the greatest mysteries in the UFO subject and has never been satisfactorily answered.